"Thanks, Claire," he said softly. "For everything." She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "Anytime, Ethan." He stepped out into the night, his figure dissolving into the damp street. Claire closed the door slowly, leaning against it with a sigh. The house was too quiet again, too empty after the warmth of his presence. She told herself it was just kindness, just gratitude on his part, nothing more. Yet as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she couldn't shake the echo of his words. "I like being here. With you, Dot, and for the first time in years." She asked herself a dangerous question, one she had no business asking. Was she beginning to feel something too? The days slipped by, each one bringing Ethan back to Claire's house, each visit lasting a little longer than the last. What began as an occasional favor soon turned into a quiet ritual. The glow of his laptop lit up her kitchen table more nights than not, and the sound of his laughter drifted through her home like a melody she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Claire told herself it was harmless. It's just a neighbor helping a young man find his footing. But somewhere deep inside, she knew it was no longer just about essays or drafts. It was about the way her heart leaped whenever she saw him walking up the path. It was about the way her evenings felt empty when he wasn't there. One late afternoon, Ethan knocked again. This time, instead of settling at the table, they carried their mugs of coffee out to the porch. The September sun was sinking low, washing the neighborhood in soft orange light. A breeze stirred the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of rain that had passed earlier. They sat side by side. Not too close, not too far. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was alive. Full of things neither of them dared to say, Claire folded her hands in her lap. She knew she had to be careful. She was older, divorced, and carried the weight of years Ethan hadn't lived through. She had scars, both visible and hidden. She didn't want him mistaking kindness for something more. "Ethan," she began softly, her eyes on the horizon, "I don't want you to misunderstand. I enjoy helping you, but I've been through things you can't possibly relate to. I don't want you thinking." She stopped. Words tangled in her throat. When she finally turned to him, she found his gaze already on her. But it wasn't the gaze of a boy uncertain of the world. It wasn't a glance of casual thanks or friendly admiration. It was steady, deep searching. And he looked at her that way a man looks when he sees something he's afraid to lose. That way someone looks when they aren't holding back. When the truth has already escaped their heart and settled in their eyes, Claire's breath caught. Her pulse quickened in a way she hadn't expected, hadn't prepared for. Every carefully built wall around her heart trembled under the weight of that single look. She wanted to look away, to laugh it off, to remind him gently that she was his neighbor, his mother's friend, someone too far outside the boundaries of what should be. But she couldn't. Her eyes locked with his, caught in something unspoken. Something powerful. "Ethan," she whispered, the sound of his name almost breaking. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His gaze did all the speaking. It told her he wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaking gratitude for attraction. He knew what he felt, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Claire's chest tightened. She had spent years telling herself love was something that had passed her by, something that belonged to younger women with fewer scars and brighter futures. Yet here was this man, not a boy anymore, not really reminding her with one look that her heart was still alive, still capable of beating harder, faster, louder. The porch light flickered on as the sun dipped lower, breaking the spell. Claire tore her eyes away, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up her mug. "You should be careful," she said finally, her voice low. People will misunderstand. And I can't." Her words trailed off. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was calm, steady, but laced with quiet determination. "I don't care what people think. I only care about what's real. And I know what I feel when I'm here." Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to remind him of the years between them, of the trust his mother had in her, of all the reasons this was wrong. But none of those words came. Instead, what came was silence. the kind of silence that carried more meaning than speech ever could. They sat there for a long while, side by side, watching the last of the sunlight fade. Claire's heart warred within her. Every rational thought screamed for her to step back, to put distance between them, to protect them both from what was unraveling. But her heart whispered something different, something terrifying, something undeniable. That night, when Ethan finally stood to leave, he paused on the porch steps. He glanced back at her, his eyes soft but unwavering. No words were exchanged, none were needed. That look lingered, burned into her memory, carried with her long after his footsteps faded down the street. Later, lying awake in her bed, Claire replayed it over and over. His eyes steady and full of something she hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not admiration, not gratitude, not love, or the beginning of it. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered if it was possible if, after everything she had lost, everything she had endured, her story wasn't over. If maybe, just maybe, her heart had been waiting for this moment all along, but the thought terrified her. Because if she let herself believe it, she would have to face the truth, her life. Her carefully guarded world might be about to change forever. Claire didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face, his gaze steady, unwavering, filled with a tenderness she hadn't been prepared to see. She tossed and turned beneath the sheets, her mind a storm of questions she had no answers for. She told herself it wasn't possible. She was older. She had lived through heartbreak, through a divorce that had left her cautious and weary. Ethan was just beginning his life, his whole future stretched ahead of him like an open road. It wasn't fair to him. It wasn't fair to her. And yet, her heart betrayed her. Every time she tried to build walls of logic, his voice slipped through. I like being here. I know what I feel when I'm with you. By morning, she was exhausted but determined. She would put distance between them. She would be kind but firm. She would end this before it could grow into something impossible. So, she ignored his text that afternoon. Would you like me to come by later? She kept her curtains drawn, told herself she needed space. But every time she passed the quiet kitchen table, she felt the echo of his laughter, the warmth of his presence. The silence pressed on her like a weight. 2 days later, just as the sky turned dusky pink, there was a knock at her door. Claire froze. She didn't need to look. She knew it was him. She opened the door anyway. Ethan stood there, his expression unreadable, but his eyes steady as always. He didn't rush in, didn't force himself into her space. He just waited, rain-darkened hair clinging to his forehead, his voice low when he finally spoke. Claire, did I do something wrong? Her heart ached at the uncertainty in his tone. She shook her head quickly. No, Ethan, you didn't. It's just, this has gone too far. We've blurred lines that should never be blurred. He stepped closer, his voice firmer now. Lines drawn by who? Neighbors. Gossip? My age? Yes, Claire whispered, tears pricking her eyes. All of that. You're young, Ethan. You have your whole life ahead of you. And me. I've already lived through things you don't understand. I don't want to trap you in something you'll regret later. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The sound of crickets rose from the yard, mingling with the distant hum of traffic. Claire braced herself for him to nod, to accept her words, to turn and leave. But he didn't. Instead, Ethan took a slow step forward, his voice steady but raw with emotion. Claire, don't you see? It's not about age. It's not about what people will say. It's about what's real. You've seen Marilli, seen me. When I've been uncertain, when I've doubted myself. You've treated me like I mattered, not just as someone's son, not just as a kid fumbling through. Do you know how rare that is? Claire swallowed hard, her throat tight. He continued, his gaze never leaving hers. I don't care about the years between us. I don't care if people talk. All I know is, when I'm with you, I feel like I can be the man I want to be. And when I look at you, his voice faltered just slightly before he steadied it. I see the woman I want to stand beside. Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Ethan, she whispered, shaking her head. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. His voice was gentle, not forceful, but full of quiet conviction. I've never been more certain of anything. The intensity of his words left Claire trembling. Part of her longed to believe him, to surrender to the warmth blooming in her chest. But another part, older, wounded, cautious, fought back fiercely. She turned away, hugging her arms around herself. If we do this, it changes everything. My friendship with your mother. This neighborhood. My life? Yours. Behind her, she heard him step closer, felt the nearness of his presence. Maybe everything needs to change. Maybe that's not something to be afraid of. Her breath caught. Slowly, she turned back to him. His eyes were filled with a depth that shook her. Not the fleeting passion of youth, but something stronger, steadier. It was one of those calm gray mornings in the suburbs outside Seattle, the kind where the clouds hung low and the air smelled faintly of wet earth. Claire stood in her front yard, watering the flower beds she had worked so hard to keep alive. Gardening had become her quiet escape after the divorce, something predictable, something she could control. Each petal, each leaf was hers to nurture, unlike her marriage, which had withered no matter how hard she tried. She was bent over the roses when she heard a familiar voice call out, "Claire." She looked up to see Mrs. Peterson, her neighbor of 15 years, standing on her porch across the street. Her gray hair was tied neatly back, and she wore her usual warm smile. "Do you have a minute?" Claire set the hose down and walked over, brushing the soil from her hands. "Of course. What's going on?" Mrs. Peterson glanced back toward her house, then leaned forward just a little, as if sharing a secret. "It's Ethan. He's been struggling with his college application essays. You've always been so good with words. Would you mind helping him? Just a little." Claire blinked, caught off guard. She knew Ethan. Of course, everyone in the neighborhood did. He had grown up in that house, quiet and polite, always helping his mother with chores. She remembered him as the shy boy who used to ride his bike down the cul-de-sac. And now here he was, 21 and ready for college. Her first instinct was to hesitate. She had her own work, her own life, and besides, what business did she have mentoring someone half her age? But then she saw the hope in Mrs. Peterson's eyes. The way only a mother worried about her child could look. "Of course," Claire said finally, smiling. "I'd be happy to." That evening, just as the sun was dipping low, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, there stood Ethan, tall but a little uncertain, with a laptop tucked under his arm. He had his mother's kind eyes, but carried himself with a quiet reserve that was all his own. "Hi, Claire," he said, his voice steady but shy. "Thanks for doing this." She stepped aside, letting him in. "Come on, it's no trouble at all. Let's sit at the dining table." They settled across from each other, the soft glow of the lamp filling the room. Ethan opened his laptop, hesitated, then pushed it toward her. "This is what I have so far. I know it's not great." Claire adjusted her reading glasses and leaned in. His words filled the screen, earnest, clumsy, but sincere. She read quietly, occasionally glancing up at him. His shoulders were tense, his eyes fixed on the table as if bracing himself for criticism. "It's not bad, Ethan," she said after a while. "Actually, it's honest. That's the best place to start." He looked up, surprised. "You really think so?" She nodded. "You've written from the heart. All it needs is shaping. You've got the raw material. That's harder to find than polished words." His face lit up just slightly, the kind of smile that revealed more than he intended. For a moment, Claire felt a warmth she hadn't expected. Like sunlight breaking through the grayness of her own carefully guarded life. The hours slipped by as they worked side by side. She pointed out where he could dig deeper, encouraged him to tell more of his story, and showed him how to make his sentences flow. He listened with a kind of attentiveness she rarely saw in people he's focused, nodding carefully, asking questions when he didn't understand. Every so often, he would laugh at one of her small jokes, and the sound filled the quiet house in a way that made Claire pause. She realized how long it had been since laughter like that had echoed here, since someone had shared her table with such openness. When the clock ticked past 9, Ethan finally leaned back with a sigh of relief. "Wow, this This feels so much better. I don't even know how to thank you. Claire closed his laptop and handed it back. You don't need to thank me. You're the one doing the hard work. I'm just guiding a little. He shook his head, his gaze meeting hers more firmly this time. No, really. It means a lot. And there it was, that look. Just a flicker, just a few seconds longer than necessary. His eyes didn't dart away like a boy's might. They stayed, steady, almost searching. Claire's breath caught. She reminded herself he was young, that she was simply helping a neighbor's son. Nothing more. Still, when he finally stood to leave, something inside her stirred in a way she hadn't felt in years. She walked him to the door, her hand resting lightly on the frame. Good luck with the revisions. Let me know if you need more help. I will, Ethan said, giving her that quiet smile again. Then he stepped into the cool night, his figure fading into the shadows of the street. Claire lingered at the door long after he was gone, the silence of the house pressing in around her. She told herself it was nothing, just a favor, just being neighborly. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something she wasn't ready to name. The rain came heavy the following week. It's the kind that turned the Seattle sky into a sheet of silver. Claire sat in her living room, a book resting unopened in her lap, listening to the rhythmic patter against the windows. She had been restless all day, though she couldn't admit why, when the knock came at her door. She already knew who it was. Ethan stood there, his jacket damp from the storm, his laptop clutched under one arm. His hair was darker from the rain, drops sliding down onto his forehead. He gave her a sheepish grin. Made another draft. Thought maybe you could take a look. For a heartbeat, Claire considered telling him she was busy, that he'd be fine on his own. She had promised herself after the last time that she wouldn't get too caught up in this. But instead, she found herself smiling. Come in before you catch a cold. They settled at her kitchen table again, the same place as before. The rain provided a soft backdrop as Ethan opened his laptop and slid it across to her. His eyes held a flicker of nervousness. But there was something else, too, something steadier, more confident. Claire began to read. His words this time were smoother, more intentional, as if he had taken her advice to heart. She couldn't help but feel proud. Ethan, she said gently, this is so much better. You're finding your voice. He exhaled, relief flashing across his face. Really? I was worried I was just rambling. No, she said firmly. This is you. Honest, thoughtful. That's what colleges want to see. He leaned back in his chair, his smile spreading. And then for a brief second, his eyes lingered on her. Not in a boyish, uncertain way, but with the kind of attention that made her pulse quicken. She quickly looked back down at the screen, pretending not to notice to steady herself. She reached across the table to point at a particular sentence. In doing so, her fingers brushed his. It was the lightest touch. A small accident, but the electricity of it startled her. She pulled her hand back quickly, her heart thudding. Sorry, she murmured. Her cheeks warm, but Ethan didn't seem flustered. He just gave a small, knowing smile, as though the moment meant something more to him. They continued their work, but the atmosphere had changed. Claire found herself noticing things she hadn't before. The steadiness of his hands as he typed. The subtle strength in his jawline when he was focused. The deepening timbre of his voice when he grew confident about his ideas. He wasn't just the shy boy next door anymore. There was something unfolding. Something more grown, more real. At one point, Ethan leaned forward, his expression unusually serious. You know, he said, I don't just come here for the essays. Claire's heart gave a sharp jolt. She forced a light laugh, though her voice trembled faintly. Oh, and why else then? He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. Because I like being here. With you, the words hung between them like suspended air, fragile and dangerous. Claire swallowed hard, suddenly unable to speak. She wanted to brush it off, to laugh and tell him it was sweet but silly, that he was young and still figuring things out. But deep inside, another voice whispered, don't dismiss it. Not yet, she finally managed, in a quieter tone. You should be careful what you say. Ethan, words can change things. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. Maybe I want them to. The room felt charged, as though the rain outside had seeped into the walls and filled the air with static. Claire quickly stood, busying herself with making tea, needing the distraction. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the kettle on the stove. When she glanced back, Etho was still watching her, not in a way that was demanding, but in a way that was steady, quietly certain. It unnerved her because she hadn't expected it. She had thought of him as a boy, a neighbor, someone who needed help. But tonight she saw something different. They drank tea together, conversation slipping back into safer territory: college plans, favorite classes, her little stories from when she was younger. They laughed more than they should have. Claire caught herself smiling in ways she hadn't in years, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea in her hands. When Ethan finally stood to leave, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. She walked him to the door, her pulse still unsettled. He paused on the threshold, his eyes lingering again, as if he wanted to say more but knew he shouldn't.